can we make art that's more like a Lizzo song than a Hemingway novel? Because I don't know that that men spent very much time changing diapers. Is this shame an indicator that I'm not doing the best work I personally could be within the very real constraints of my life that I have worked very hard to accept and embrace? Or is this shame actually just me internalizing responsibility for the gap between what the male writer was able to do in 1940 and what my life looks like?
Yeah.
Welcome to Atypical Kids Mindful Parents Podcast, the neurodiversity affirming parenting podcast that helps parents feel less alone. I'm Kate Lynch, a mindfulness coach and parent of an amazing atypical kid. I interview parents and experts who share my mission to create a kinder, more inclusive future. You can look forward to grounding practices, relatable parenting stories, and groundbreaking strategies. If you long to embody mindfulness and compassion in your parenting life, follow us here for connection, strategies, and support. Let's go on this journey together.
I never quite know what's going to occur when I start speaking with my guests. Sometimes the topic end up being different from what I expected, or we go in a completely different direction, or we go much deeper into something than I had ever hoped we would. I never want to cut off a good conversation, especially if I know it's going to help you. So sometimes I like to split our conversations into multiple podcasts. This is an example of that. I hope you enjoy this next conversation with Ryan Rose Weaver. If you haven't heard our first conversation, we can go back and listen to that. Please review the podcast so that other parents can find us and feel more connected, less alone. Thank you. This is Ryan Rose Weaver, a writer, educator, consultant, and parent to a twice exceptional child. She's taught hundreds of students across New York City. I'm really excited to talk with you about connecting with our creativity and how self-tending and creativity can be preventative care for parental burnout. Burnout is something I'm very interested in, especially for parents of neurodivergent kids. I'm so glad we get to geek out on this. I want to continue our conversation into some of the work you're doing with creativity and tending. When I'm feeling more fulfilled, I can show up with more presence and openness with my kid or with anyone else. I feel like what I have to share coming from that place is so much richer and more meaningful than what I have to share when my cup is empty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still doing it. I'm going through the motions, but a little resentment. So when I pause even for couple of breaths to feel that sense that I am fulfilled a little bit. And I really didn't even think about it until my son was in kindergarten. I was in activation or shutdown, but mostly activation. I was in fight or flight, a lot of anxiety, a lot of looking for answers outside of myself. It wasn't until I had a little bit of time, even though it wasn't the perfection I thought it would be, there was still a lot of advocating to be done. I had a little bit of time. And I could go, okay, what is there for me? How am I going to find fulfillment as Kate? So tell us what you found.
I'm in that place now where my child has just started kindergarten. There really is a moment to breathe. As you said, there's always more to be done, but it's a real milestone moment. And it makes me think about rituals, right? I think that for people who have children that are the same age as mine. I have a friend who has 4 kids and her youngest just went into kindergarten. And there's just something about that. No other little people at home. There's a feeling that you've kind of swum across a great river with this child on your back and like, ah.
Yeah. Right. And then for those who it's not going well, that can be super painful, like even more painful.
Yeah.
Oh no, do I have to do this again and find another school? Because this one's not.
Right. Exactly. And I've had that experience. Oh, finally my kid's in preschool. Oh, nope, they don't really know how to support him. Oh, now he's in a different school in a different setting. Even though he had an IEP, there was still things to be sorted. And now he's in kindergarten and things are going incrementally better. But he had an altercation in line just yesterday. Something I joke about with my husband is there's no plateau of forever perfection that we're climbing to and that we just get to set up a whole civilization there. I grew up whitewater rafting. With parents, I often talk about it in terms of whitewater rafting. Like there's rapids, you scout them, you walk the length of them, you try to have a plan, you go through the rapid, maybe it goes well, maybe you flip and you lose all your beer, tragic. And your first aid kit or your favorite hiking boots or whatever. My dad has lost his phone. Like still, if you emerge with your life, it's a good river trip. And then there's a process called eddying out where you float to the next calm place on the shoreline and you pull up and there's the aftercare piece. Wow. And so I think it's more of an eddying out than I've reached the plateau of forever perfection. So there's an eddying out energy to right now in my life as a parent. And I'm noticing that, like I said, in people in my sort of same parenting cohort. And there is really an existential questioning of who am I now? And so I think the practices that you're laying out, both in terms of remembering that you're still held and supported, that you don't necessarily need to organize your life around the demands of a small being in order to organize your life. You can organize your life in a different way if that feels accessible. That can feel hard and scary, and it can feel hard to have the mental space or the practices to sense into what do I want? What do I most need? So I think what you're offering is so valuable. But what I will also say is I think that parents really deserve a formal moment to mark kindergarten. It's a major developmental change as well. So somewhere between 5 and 6, they go from being a little kid to trying to be a bigger kid. And there's less needs, there's more interest in peers, things like that. So somewhere in there, I think there's a missing milestone. Yeah, I just took to go, wow, okay, that happened. And I just was on silent retreat last week. That was a part of a training I'm doing, but it just happened to be incredibly fortunately timed. And it was really meaningful to go and sit and just be with myself and to have the container held where I didn't have to talk. I didn't have to cook. I didn't have to tend. Probably the most I did was break my silence to help somebody figure out how the creamer worked at the Omega Dining Hall.
Oh, did you go to the Omega Institute?
I did. It was really beautiful. And my teachers were incredible, mindfulness-based stress reduction instructors. It was beautiful and just allowed me to digest the big meal of the last 5 years, particularly those of us who had children during the pandemic. Like, there's a lot to process. I know that it's not within everybody's ability to go away for 5 days or to go on retreat. I will put a plug in for Omega because you can camp there. Very affordable. Yeah. I grew up the child of 2 broke social workers, and it was just about throwing our stuff in a pickup truck and going and camping and just experiencing some quietude, something to mark the passage.
Yeah, I worked at the Omega Institute for a season. I lived in a tent and I worked April through October. Then I went back the next year and worked for about a month. And I actually was married in the sanctuary there. So it's a very special place for us. And I used to go back every year and teach yoga for a while. After working there and then starting my own retreats, I was very particular about where I wanted to lead retreats. I love the idea of having a retreat and really having time to digest that experience of getting to that point. And I will say that kindergarten developmental stage that you're talking about, I try and de-age any kind of developmental milestones when it comes to neurodivergent kids, because we don't know.
Yeah, there's much variation.
So much variation. Yeah. And it's all okay. And you can celebrate.
We all have variations. Nobody is exactly at the median. When I say that kids are developing more independence or more orientation towards peers. I'm speaking from standpoint of a teacher making generalizations and making the I statement of my own child and what I notice in him. He needs us a lot right now. That's a tender place for me in this season of parenting because he's so energetic and yet he has some dyspraxia. So he's constantly crashing into things. He's missing 2 teeth. He's got stitches on his head. He still has needs and there's a lot of vigilance required, even though he's really excited to venture out into the world. I feel like I'm not enough for him sometimes. When those moments where he's down 2 teeth, that's a big not enough moment, even though we can't really avoid those moments as parents.
How about a teenage babysitter?
Yes, we've actually had some really wonderful mother's helpers for anybody who's feeling like they don't have the time or the space, particularly for an only child. And that wasn't the plan for him to be an only child. One of the reasons I left the classroom was because I had a late pregnancy loss. There are moments where I just wish he had a sibling that could build this pillow fort with him. I had a brother that I just absolutely adored and he was one of my best friends all through the years of growing up. So it just feels like there's someone missing. But I think more and more I'm the one creating that story and reacting to it. And I don't know that my son feels like something is missing.
Does that matter?
I think it's separating my grief from his perception or his experience of his own childhood.
Right.
His childhood is what it is. It's complete as it is, even though my motherhood, it hasn't taken the shape that I wanted in terms of the number of living beings who are here in my home. Part of the work I'm doing in this season is facilitating a grief group for other people in that position. So I think that many of these practices would be of benefit to them as well. Are you parenting a child who's presenting challenges that you didn't expect, but you're also not parenting children that you did expect to? And many families, those practices are really essential for those moments. Any moment where you feel like you're not enough as a parent because of something that's beyond your control.
There's so much lack of control and uncertainty. The upside of it is we get kicked off the hamster wheel. I feel like I was on a spiritual path before I had my kid, but this is what really woke me up. It's transformative.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't have that experience of pregnancy loss. I can't speak to that.
Yeah. I agree with you. I feel the same about friends who are divorced, for example. There's so many different ways that we awaken and go, oh, why have I been trying so hard to climb to the plateau of forever perfection when it doesn't exist?
Yeah.
And if it does, then somebody keeps moving the time. I was almost there now. Like it's 100 hours. So
because there's no such thing as perfection.
Because there's no such thing. And I think that there's a grief in that, in recognizing how much we sacrificed for the sake of that mission before awakening. Yeah. And there's a lot of letting go of the habitual patterns of achievement that might still be in place, even though we don't believe that there's somewhere to climb to. But that's what I've been training to do my whole life. My hands and legs are still moving. And so it's learning to rest and wait and fill ourselves up, as you've been saying. I think I'll be learning how to do that for the rest of my life. But I think the awakening has come through my motherhood journey. And I am grateful. I don't believe in having to find a silver lining for grief, but I do think that this awakening comes for many of us in one way or another. And the conversations to be had on the other side of it are so beautiful and so different from the ones I was having before. Yeah.
When you were talking about habits, I was thinking about my people-pleasing habits and how I've done so much work, right, to deconstruct those patterns, and they keep coming back. It's like this real reactivity.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you named people-pleasing as a kind of reactivity, because I think that it's a trauma response, and there's so many good reasons why we would do it. Yeah. And I think it's like, what is the act of kindness that's required in this situation and what's not that? And that thing we were talking about where teachers are really afraid of parents' reactivity. So they do these things that don't serve the situation. Yeah, it's so hard. My partner and I talk about that all the time. And I think that's another lifelong unlearning.
But it's another thing that really can lead to burnout.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's driven by that guilt we were talking about when we started this conversation. I should be doing something more. So I can't turn towards myself. I need to be turning towards these other people. And for me, when I was growing up, that was true. I mentioned my little brother. I was very much a caregiver for him. It was not imagined. I needed to make food.
Not optional.
Not optional. Yeah. And I think many caregivers have this lived experience and an embodied sense of, if I let down my guard and I go inward, something bad could happen on the outside.
Or if I choose myself, I will be shunned.
Yes. I'll be seen as selfish.
Yeah. And selfishness is like the worst possible, worse than any of the bad words. Just that label would be devastating because, at least I know for me, being selfish meant not having connection.
Yeah.
Being deprived of connection.
Yes. Absolutely. And connection is vital, particularly when you're a child. And so much of it is done in service of belonging.
Yeah.
I'm still finding out what belonging is in adulthood.
That makes a lot of sense. And I love that you're creating spaces for parents. And would you say it's people with pregnancy loss?
What I'm noticing about the shape my work is taking, because I did begin writing about pregnancy loss, it just felt like there was such a gap. But really, it's about the full span of experiences that caregivers can have. So our childhood experiences, like we just talked about, typically if people define themselves as caregivers, they have a background very similar to the ones we've just talked about, where there was a real need for care within our families of origin that we stepped into. There was a skill set developed that then became a career or a vocation or an orientation towards parenting. That is something that can become very challenged if you experience infertility, if you experience pregnancy loss, and then if you experience having an atypical child. Those are moments of awakening where you are not only trying to figure out how to live into a future that you never imagined, but you're also casting that light of awareness backwards and reflecting on your story and how you got here. A lot of the work that I do is in that place. And Helen Peterson on Substack calls it the portal. There's a specific portal experience that people with caregiver identities move through, really evaluating what is a balance between self and other that feels sustainable. And what's the difference between that and my felt sense of that and the messages that I've received in the past? And then how do I use mindfulness to create a tiny bit of space between the conditioning that I've received and the balance that I need to survive and to continue to, I'm almost 40, like my goal is to live at least another 40 years. How can I survive?
And if not for ourselves, then for our kids who need us.
Exactly. So a lot of the things I do are in that place, and I'm facilitating a group of people with pregnancy loss. Some of them have living children, some of them don't. I'm putting together a waiting list of people who would like to meet monthly to meditate, similar to the work you do, maybe a little more open-ended. Whereas I think that what you do is incredibly targeted. It's very specific. And I also do interviews, and I'm noticing that there's a trend in the interviews coming up around, when do you have a sort of open-ended, diverse, inclusive community where you're creating a big tent? And where do you really need an affinity group where the people that are in this Zoom room or in this retreat or whatever are really having a hyper-specific experience, like the very rare form of pregnancy loss that I experienced, where they really need to be with people who get it, who have a deep embodied experience of, yes, that's exactly what happened to me. I think that we need both types of community. I don't think one is better than the other. I think we need both. And of course, even in a small hyper-specific group, I know you and I would value being inclusive and creating a good container that's safe. But I think we need all kinds of communities.
Right.
What I hear from my readership is that everyone's longing for more connection than they have.
I'm going to keep turning us back toward creativity. And maybe I could read this
quote
Yeah.
that you wrote to me to spur that. Would that be all right?
Yeah.
Creativity is another way. There's community, but then there's also this whole world going on right in here between my two ears that wants to be expressed and that is healing. You wrote, I see creativity as preventative care for caregiver burnout, particularly for preventing the burnout that is so common among people who love and work with atypical kids. It can be a grind. We can't snap our fingers and feel self-regulated and present all the time. As you so wisely noted, thank you, they can have big feelings, and sometimes the way the world relates to them gives us big feelings. We need support in cultivating the practices that help us recenter, because the work of loving atypical kids will knock us down time and time again. Yeah, maybe that just stands alone, or maybe you have something else to say about your creative process that you'd like to share to help parents find their own, because I think it's such a scary word for a lot of people. My experience has been extremely fraught with creativity.
Tell me more.
Okay. I've always been an artist. My mom's a visual artist. By middle school, I knew I'd be an author by the time I was 60. And the way things are going, actually, that might pan out. But I started writing this book in 2019, and it's been done for 2 years. I turned it in, and the publisher immediately went out of business. So I've been working with someone who's helping me with the proposal for the last 2 years. And it's been a very frustrating, painful process. Now, meanwhile, I've got the blog, which I absolutely love and is such a great outlet for creativity. I've got my yoga teaching, which is a great outlet for creativity. One of these days, I'll get back to visual art. I have a lot of outlets, but I would say it is fraught because there's the stuff that's just for us that comes out. But then if we want to get it out in the world, there's so much shame around it. I don't know why. I don't know if it has to do with my mom being an artist, but there's so much wrapped up in it, especially for me with this process of writing this book and then trying to get this book out in the world and feeling so unprepared for that. Unable to control the outcome at this point. There's shame that's arising.
Yeah.
But I know for other parents, it's somebody when I was 3 told me I was bad at drawing. And that kind of, by the time I was in middle school, it totally fizzled and I've never drawn since.
That makes me think of the Bluey episode Dragon, which is all about that.
Ooh, I've been determined to watch Bluey. Obviously, Ocean's too old, but just watch it on my own. I've never seen an episode.
I actually use Bluey episodes in my teaching with adolescents because the episodes are so short and so rich. I am totally that parent that will not stop talking about how brilliant Bluey is. I'm really annoying in that way.
Let's do it.
Yes. Oh my God. Somebody please ask me about Bluey. And, there's an episode where the kids are drawing and the parents are invited to participate. And there's a pretty big difference in terms of how one parent was socialized over another around art. And the episode is really all about that. It's beautiful. And the episodes are like 6 minutes and they're really teaching stories. People have said it's a show for grownups about parenting and kids just happen to like it.
Fantastic.
When we talk about creativity, it's an umbrella term and it makes me think of the way we talk about cooking, gardening, or meditation. Cooking can be making Kraft mac and cheese out of a box or making your own creme brulee and getting a blowtorch. Both of those things are cooking. Creativity can be, what happens if I do my tree pose like this? Or it can be going on a book tour with 12 stops and having a 6-figure deal. So I think there's not one form that's more valid than the other, but we get a lot of messages that say otherwise. When I talk about creativity as preventative care, the way that I think about it is that it's often a more accessible stop on the journey to self-regulation for parents that have been going like 100 miles an hour versus sit and meditate for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
particularly people that are in the burnout phase where it's, I just quit my job. I just Jerry Maguired out of there. I stopped a printer to death in a field. That's like such a dated reference. I'm talking about Office Space. I'm out. And so then people are like, now what? And I know that for me, I felt that. I was at a sort of career high when I left the classroom. And doing sitting meditation felt really inaccessible to me.
Oh, yeah.
So what felt like between 100 miles an hour and what felt like 0 miles an hour, like crashing into a brick wall, was writing and yoga and dancing. And it felt like I was doing something, which for those of us that are unlearning productivity and grind culture, doing something brings up less guilt than doing quote unquote nothing, even though we know meditation is not nothing. There's less headwinds of guilt that we have to fight against.
Right.
And so exercise, if you're socialized as a woman, sometimes you're like, oh, I'm getting help, or whatever story you need to tell yourself. I'm still behaving in accordance with my conditioning if I'm exercising or writing. It's still behaving in accordance with the rules. I think with kids, they get really overwhelmed with even writing an essay. For us, like a 5-paragraph essay is another day in the office, but for a 6th grader, a 5-paragraph essay, you might as well tell them to climb Mount Everest. They're really struggling with it, some of them. And so we break the process down into brainstorming, drafting, revising, adding on, editing, and pre-publishing preparation. When I think about flow state, I think about it being work that's primarily in the brainstorming drafting phase with no necessary connection to publishing. Because that's where you're playing around. That's where you're in this what if space. It's where you still have access to beginner's mind. It's more like play.
Like morning pages or something.
Morning pages. Yeah. For everybody, it's different. The way that I tend to think of it is it's more about how it feels than what it looks like. It's more about the somatic experience of flow. And when we talk about flow, it's like a sense of like time vanishes. Our brains are in this joyful, getting bathed in happy chemicals kind of place. There's no sense of clenching. We could do it forever. It's like you wake up and it's 3 o'clock. It's time to go get my kid. And that's a really beautiful state. Like it's a very restful mind state that doesn't look to the outside world like rest. So it feels safer to many people than actually resting, even though we need that too and our bodies crave it. I can be sitting at my computer in flow state and I look to the rest of my household like I'm quote unquote doing work.
Yeah.
So only I know, and not to say that my kindergartners are going to come over and be like, why aren't you building a pillow fort with me? I think if you're outside your body looking at yourself doing the thing, then you're probably not in flow state. I think it's just allowing ourselves to have kind of a wall between brainstorming, drafting, even revising is still, I think, often flow state. It's about having an idea like, oh, maybe I'll add a flashback to that passage. Or what if I changed the narrator? You're still in that what if space in revising. I think just having a firm wall where editing that's mañana. That's a problem for future, Ryan.
I wonder if a lot of parents might start to get into a shame spiral if they're not being consistent with something or not doing something right.
We've all kind of absorbed ideas of what an artist looks like at work. A lot of those images that I've observed, at least, they're male writers who had a lot of support. They may not have had children, probably didn't face any social pressure to create or tend them. Whereas if you read Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own, she didn't have children, but she still wrote about the fact that there needs to be a form of literature that's more congenial to the way that women's lives work, where you can pick it up and put it down and it can fit into your life. Amanda Monte has written a lot about this as well, about embracing interruptions and thinking about what interruptions add to the creative process. They're almost their own contribution to the medium.
Wow.
They're another ingredient
Mm.
in the creative process. I love Lizzo. And very often in a Lizzo song, there'll be some little outtake or laughing where it's like, those are the things that happened in the interstitial spaces in the recording room and they became part of the art. And so can we make art that's more like a Lizzo song than a Hemingway novel? Because I don't know that men spent very much time changing diapers.
Very
And that's
doubtful.
okay. So is this shame an indicator that I'm not doing the best work I personally could be within the very real constraints of my life that I have worked very hard to accept and embrace? Or is this shame actually just me internalizing responsibility for the gap between what the male writer was able to do in 1940 and what my life looks like?
Yeah.
It's not easy to let that go, but at least we can find that little space within mindfulness of this is just a thought. Is it real?
Mm.
Is there
that
evidence?
really true?
Is that really true? I think it's another way where we can have an evidence-based practice as creative people too. What is realistic and real about my practice and what is stuff that I grew up with and things that I haven't really challenged? I think every creative person with children, that is part of the work. That's part of living a creative life. As a caregiver, it's not going to look like whatever we've internalized that image to be, unless we grew up with prolific parents who were caregivers. If we were lucky enough to have those role models, and many of us were not, there's a lot of unlearning that happens as you're learning how to tend your creative craft. It's unlearning messages about what that is, how it should look, how it should be evaluated. It's part and parcel of so much that's happening in modern feminism, unlearning diet culture, unlearning grind culture, unlearning white supremacy. It's another aspect of liberation work and activist work to allow your creative practice to be what it is.
Unlearning the expectation that the house has to be clean.
Also that if you don't carry that expectation, but somebody in your life does, then they don't get to come to your house anymore.
Or they come to the house and they just see it as it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've had to let go of my guilt. And I think actually being a parent of a neurodivergent kid has really helped me care less about that external gaze, what other people think. I can't care about what other people think and stay sane at the same time.
At least around things that are safe to let go. For example, a person of color being aware of how they're being perceived on the train. I think those things are not necessarily safe to let go, but I do think it's safe to let go the external gaze in our own homes that is telling us this doesn't look like Pinterest. It's safe to let that go.
Yeah, I've had some wonderful conversations about the supermarket meltdown and the difference between being white and your kid having a supermarket meltdown and being a person of color. It becomes a much different situation. I really think either way, we're aware of other people, but by stepping in and being confident, we've got this, it still is more protective than being afraid and trying to fix to make it sanitized for public consumption. Being okay with how my kid is responding, not that I'm going to ignore whatever's happening if someone's on the phone calling 911, but appearing focused on the child, confident, and even saying aloud to the child rather than to someone else, we've got this, we're working through this, so that others can hear, but they also can hear my voice. That shows the other people that they don't have to find a solution because you've already got the solution.
Yes. And that goes to what you were saying about people pleasing, right? People pleasing is shifting your orientation to managing other people's perceptions of what's happening to you around something that you can't control.
And I totally used to do that because everyone was staring at us. Now I just
Yeah.
keep my focus on my kid, and I make sure that I'm speaking at a volume that other people can hear, but I'm not apologizing for him.
Yeah. It can be so powerful just to say, oh, honey, I hear that you're so tired. I hear that you're so hungry. Let's get you home. And as you said, it's like other people don't have to find a solution for me. I've got this. I'm attuned to my child. That connects to what you're saying about a clean house versus one that may be more cluttered. I'm imagining the judgy neighbor, the in-law, or mom from playgroup coming in and just having that conversation with them. Yeah, we've been having a lot of fun around here.
It's a great way to frame it. Yeah.
Isn't it neat? Oh, yeah, let me show you this Lego creation, and just making it clear that that's what you value.
Yeah. Our values front and center rather than someone else's values or even imagined imposed values we're projecting.
Yeah. And understanding that there's very few values that are absolute. Cleanliness, hygiene, those are very important. And what's the opportunity cost of pursuing those to the very end? Probably some creativity, spontaneity, children feeling at ease. Like they can make mistakes. And if cleanliness is a value, noticing, are there any polarizations in you that feel silenced by your tireless pursuit of, or performance of that value? It's a lot of internal conversations. I think it's just a lot of mindfulness before you even get to the easel or the computer or the guitar.
And, so how does gathering together or being in community around that conversation help?
I think it eases the pressure that we put on our partners to make it okay that we're doing creative work. I think it's really helpful for people that are in caregiving work to let each other in, because then the way that you're conceptualizing what's possible and what's quote unquote normal, even though in this context, what does that word even mean? What are my friends doing? A much more accurate measure of what my creative practice could potentially look like versus what do I see in this person's Instagram presence.
You're talking about modeling, and you're talking about Hemingway being, if that's the only model we have, then thinking that it's supposed to be this way. But if we have a group of other caregivers or people believing in a different way, then we've got those models that we can see, and that becomes our Sangha.
Yeah. And people who share the same values, right? So somebody who doesn't value creativity might bring more judgment to the way your house looks. But somebody who does value creativity, who's on the path with you, which is what Sangha is, it's people traveling our path that we've chosen, or we're all trying to take some steps whenever we can towards coming home to ourselves. Sometimes it can be really helpful just to be witnessed in your struggle, just to be able to say, this week was so fucking hard. And have people go, yeah, it is so fucking hard. Instead of, have you tried? Just to have people be like, yeah, it's like that sometimes.
And that's where it comes back to that affinity group, right? Somebody who's on a similar path, who gets it, who shares your values, who you don't have to explain.
Not your mom who did it 40 years ago under entirely different parenting conditions and only has the most gauzy memories of parenting, and not Susie down the street who isn't trying to do what you're doing. And then sometimes it can be helpful to say, does anybody have any ideas on how to work with this particular obstacle? There's so much learning that can happen in that space. And that's going back to my grad school training as an educator. Lev Vygotsky was this education researcher who talked about the zone of proximal development. As we enter into a new phase, we tend to learn more from the people that are in that phase with us and people that are just ahead, like near age peers or people that are in the same developmental phase, either with their children or their art, whatever. We tend to learn more from those people than we do from teachers. For example, children tend to acquire more vocabulary when they are in a mixed age group of peers than they do from direct instruction from adult teachers. The group is the class. And sometimes just creating the container for discussions to happen is enough.
That makes so
Just
much sense.
Making sure that spirit of respect is there, like you said, but really just allowing the conversation to unfold and doing what you've been doing throughout this conversation, right? If somebody says something and you're like, I don't know, maybe that's not the most inclusive, or maybe that's not true for everybody's experience, and just guiding it back. That's such an important facilitator skill, and when I'm always really happy to receive, and it's a lot of what I do. You know, not all of us feel like we have to go to our friends' baby showers after a late pregnancy loss.
Even if they don't understand, we understand. We get it.
Exactly. I think it is helpful to have a facilitator who is maybe not right in the exact same stage, but you don't have to be that far ahead. When I was teaching at the Brooklyn Kitchen, I didn't go to culinary school, but I certainly knew more than the people who were coming in who had never held a chef's night before. That's really all that's needed. And sometimes learning from somebody who went to culinary school can be hard because they're going too fast and they know so much. They've forgotten, in the same way that the boomer mom is maybe not the most helpful person to talk about potty training with. They don't remember. I don't know. I just kind of figured it out.
It just happened. It was magic.
Right. Maybe I'll call my best friend from high school then and she'll have something for me. You're not traumatizing or re-traumatizing people when you share from your own experience, but you don't have to be on a mountaintop so high above people either.
There is that fine line or that balance when facilitating. A couple of things I've learned from the trauma-informed perspective. For myself, at least, if I'm part of a group, I'll be picking up a 5-pound weight, not a 100-pound weight, to model vulnerability. If I want to share something vulnerable, I'm not going to drop a huge anvil on the group, and giving people the opportunity to just talk about little things. Even if there is something huge going on, they may not feel ready, and that's okay. Then there's that vulnerability hangover that happens, which is okay too. I always like to talk about that because that's part of it. And then having community guidelines, we create them together at the beginning of every cohort.
Absolutely. I'm a huge believer in words. What you're saying about developing teaching stories goes back to teenagers and framing the choices. I'm not going to offer a silly, embarrassing story about myself to a teenager because they don't need to take care of me. I think that's a great metaphor.
What do you most want to be remembered for?
Helping people not be so hard on themselves. Helping people feel compassion and understanding for themselves.
How about a parenting memory that brings you joy?
We just moved to Cape Cod from New York City, and it's a big change. And so many people have been like checking on us, like, are you okay? The other day, my partner was going and taking care of himself. He was going to see a concert with a friend. So I was solo with my son. I decided that we were going to have an adventure day and go check out some new places around us. So we went to a really cool coffee shop. We went to the Natural History Museum because we love science. We went to a vintage store and bought a book for his dad. We went and got sandwiches at a cafe where they have markers and you can draw on the window. A lot of the small talk with him is he'll be like, Mama, 3 groups of 6 make 18, right? Yes. 5 is just a really special age where they're so scrumptious and he's really interested in being a companion. I'll carry your bag for you, Mama. So it just felt like a really special date, him and me, and really intimate. Sometimes solo parenting does not feel that way. At least it doesn't for me. I have had many moments of feeling unsupported in my solo parenting time. This just felt joyous. And I felt supported because we were being supported by our community. The community at the coffee shop, the community at the museum, the community as helpers who were kind enough to make our lunch. I was supported so I could be supportive, and I received support from him and in the little tiny ways that he's learning to give it. Yeah, it just felt like a sweet moment of fruition. Those moments, it's so important to slow down and feel them in teaching and in parenting. It's so sweet. I think that's what you're talking about when you talk about gratitude, right? I'm not gaslighting yourself into hashtag gratitude when the day has just truly been shit, but writing that letter after the IEP meeting, all the things that are going right and that are beautiful and good about your child. And when you have a good day, a child's not all their days are good.
Yeah.
This is why I
We're
do
so
what I
much
do.
more grateful and
Yeah.
appreciative of those smoother moments,
Yeah.
and there's joy in every life. There are moments we can train our brains to latch onto those
Yeah.
rather than getting stuck on the hard moments, even if there are a lot more hard moments. Giving our creativity some space to flow is one way to do that. That's a wonderful way to end. I really appreciate our connection, Ryan. Thank you so much.
Me too. I'm so looking forward to hearing how Ocean's Year goes, what this conversation opens up for the people in your world.
Thank you. Same here with kindergarten and Cape Cod. How exciting. What a big change.
Yeah.
Very cool. You can find Ryan on Substack at Ryan Rose Weaver and on Instagram, same name, Ryan Rose Weaver. I will put the links in the show notes, of course, but I wanted you to hear it as well. Thank you for joining Atypical Kids Mindful Parents. I really appreciate you walking alongside me